While it is true that a demand curve or the entire demand structure for a good can either be relatively inelastic, looking something like this, or relatively elastic, being rather flat in nature, it is also true that elasticity can also vary along a demand curve as well. So what you generally end up getting is a situation where we have quantity and we have price, and we'll have a downward sloping demand curve looking something like this. At the lower levels of prices, down on the lower end of the demand curve, you are going to generally have inelastic demand. So your elasticity of demand values are going to be less than 1. And then on your upper end of prices, up in this area, your elasticity of demand values are going to be elastic. Now, the reason that is, we have something out there in the economy called the price to income ratio, where the idea is that consumers respond more to percentage changes in higher prices than they do lower prices. And I guess the key to understanding this is you have to realize that what we're plotting here with elasticity is percentage change. It is not absolute change. So in other words, for an example, if we go in and let's say I start out with $1 worth of income and somebody walks by and they give me another dollar, so I'm standing there with $2. All right, the absolute change in the amount of money I have is $1, right? So I went from $1 to $2. But the percentage change in income is going to be 100%. I doubled what I had before. Well, let's turn this around to where, let's say we start out with $2. Somebody comes by, they take $1 out of my pocket, so I go down to $1. Well, the absolute change is again $1. But when you take a number and you half it, the percentage change is now only 50%. So you have to remember that we're dealing with percentage changes when you're dealing with elasticity. So let's take a real simple example to show you why you have different elasticity values along one given demand curve. Let's go in and let's just take a very simple good, let's call it gasoline, and we have our quantity here and our price here, and we have just a nice normal downward sloping demand curve for gasoline. Now, to make the numbers simple, let's start out and say that we have an initial price per gallon of 50 cents. So P naught is equal to 50 cents. And when we draw our line over where it strikes our demand curve, then that is going to be the quantity being demanded at that price. All right, so we'll just call it Q naught. Now, let's assume now that we go in and increase the price of gasoline by 10%. Well, 10% of 50 cents is an absolute change of 5 cents per gallon. So we go from 50 up to P1 of 55 cents per gallon, a relatively small price change. Well, if you draw the line over now where it strikes the demand curve, the quantity demanded is in fact going to go down. But because it was only a 5 cent per gallon change, it didn't really hit anybody's pocketbooks that hard, and so therefore the quantity demanded goes down by a relatively small amount. Now let's take that same idea and go to the upper end of the demand curve. And let's just say we're going to start right here at an initial price of $1.50 per gallon. Now, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to increase the price of gasoline by 10%. But 10% of $1.50 is going to be an absolute change of 15 cents per gallon. So we go from $1.50 all the way up to our new price of $1.65 per gallon. So you notice at the $1.50 per gallon, here was our quantity that was being demanded. So we'll just, again, going to go ahead and mark that as a Q naught. And once the price went up by 15 cents, we moved further along the demand curve, and therefore our quantity demanded reduced by a much larger amount. All right, this amount right here versus this small amount back down here. So the idea is when you have percentage changes of a higher priced commodity or the higher price of a particular commodity, you're going to have a much stronger response. Therefore, your demand is going to be elastic. Whereas if you have the same percentage change of a lower price, there's not going to be that much difference in the change in price. Therefore, there's not going to be that much response, and therefore demand is going to be inelastic. So that's why you have different elasticity values along one given demand curve.